Hello everybody, this is Mr. Rob and welcome back to another episode of the South Carolina Gamecocks Dynasty here on EA Sports College Football 25. Today we've reached the preseason for year number 6, which is the 2029 season here in the Dynasty. So today we're going to preview the team, get ready for another season, and also preview some of the other teams around the country, get you familiar with all the teams in the nation who will compete this year, who we will see, and end by looking at the schedule in that regard. So if you're excited for this one, make sure you drop a like and you subscribe down below, especially if you want more Dynasty Mode content, as we're coming off an off season where we did lose a lot of key starters to graduation, so it's a little bit of a transition period here in Columbia, but we did get the number 1 ranked recruiting class in the off season. If you missed that, go check it out. It was a great off season. We did it also without no transfers to the team, all freshmen. So again, a little bit of a transition period here for the Gamecocks. We're looking to take advantage. So we'll take a look at the team starting out, get you familiar with who we will see. As here's a look at the full roster right now. We are in 88 overall, 87 on offense, 90 on defense. And we'll start with the quarterback, which is the biggest question for this team. Who will play quarterback? Because Dante Reno, after 3 years as starter, has graduated, and it's kind of an open playing field right now. And the guy who's the top ranked on the roster is redshirt freshman from right here in Columbia, Shaquille Brock, 6'1", 208. And he had a good, impressive spring, and he's kind of taken the lead of the pack. You know, he's a former 4-star recruit. I was high on Brock a couple of seasons ago, but he's never thrown a pass before. He's the only quarterback in the mix who's never thrown a pass at the collegiate level, considering he redshirted last year. He will get the first chance, so Shaquille Brock is going to be the quarterback in our first game of the season. It's a big one. I won't tell you against who yet, but I have to say I wouldn't be a little nervous if I'm being honest, because he's never thrown a snap or he's never thrown a pass. But we'll give Brock the chance to be the quarterback for this team. If he does not do so good, there are a couple of guys behind him I am interested in. Telvin Byler, the redshirt senior from Darlington, who was the first quarterback that we sort of recruited in this series. We got in the first offseason, 6'2", 202. He's gotten a little bit of playing time before when he's relieved Reno in the past, and he's the quickest of the bunch. So I think if Brock does struggle, I think Byler will be the first guy to get a chance to play. And then also in the mix, you got Josh McDaniel from Chester, South Carolina, who's also played a little bit, kind of a similar game to Byler, but I think I do like Byler better than him. And then there's also Matt Cockrell, who's played before. So a lot of quarterbacks in the mix of these 4. It's really anybody's game. But in week 1, we will have Shaquille Brock underneath center. So still something to keep an eye on this season. At halfback, it's going to be pretty obvious who the halfback is. It's redshirt junior Wade Mann, who has just been the lifeblood of this offense the past couple of seasons. He has been absolutely phenomenal. The former 4-star recruit has led the country in rushing the past 2 seasons. 1,400 yards, 11 touchdowns last year, 13 for 10 and 7 last year. Averages went up. I try not to use him as much last year, but he's just so good. It's hard to keep him off the field. Also gets involved in the receiving game. He had 4 receiving touchdowns last year. Wade Mann is the complete package. He will be an every down back. I've tried the whole let's rest him and give some other guys a chance, but honestly, I don't think it's worked. I think this year we're just going to lean into the Wade Mann show. If he does need a break, we'll probably see Monty Soro, who's now a senior, who we've seen in reserve some, and he's actually a pretty good reserve back in my opinion, from Flowery Branch, Georgia. He had 303 yards and 3 touchdowns last year with a 4.7 average. So Soro can get it done. He's played 4 years with this team, so I think he's a good back in case something disastrous were to happen to Wade Mann. At wide receiver, it's still anybody's game again at the top. I'll start down here, actually. Ted Martino kind of set himself away from the pack last year as the number 1 receiver. We got him last offseason as a Jacksonville State transfer, so he came from the other Gamecocks, and he's been awesome, has elite development. Now a senior, had 10 touchdowns for us last year, 693 yards, 43 receptions. A great player to have. He will be the number 1 receiver this year. He can get behind the defense. He can make the grab across the middle. Started his career at Ole Miss, didn't get a catch. Went to Jacksonville State, played well, and got recruited by South Carolina. So it's been kind of a full circle moment for Ted Martino. So he will be the number 1 receiver. At number 2, it's going to be Amari Allgaier. He did not have a good 2028. He's also a senior at this point, so we're going to have to replace both of our receivers in the offseason. He started last year as the number 1, but kind of fell out of favor. Only had 30 catches, 393 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We are going to be asking him to be the number 2 this season, so he needs to step up because there is some talent behind him who will get some playing time. Redshirt freshman Juan Gallegos is already at 85, boosted up to an 87 overall, and he can fly. You know, he has a lot of Ted Martino in his game. Says he's a route runner, but he's a very fast route runner. He's got elite development from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, so I want to see him get the field this season. We might see him in the slot, we might see him outside, but those will be the top 3. Also have Carl Saban on the roster, who we got from Wake Forest a couple of off seasons ago. I was very high on him when he came out of high school. Fortunately, we didn't recruit him, but he's back now, and I actually got him. So he's a senior, though, but he didn't have the best 2028, in my opinion. I still have high hopes for him this season, so he should see the field. And there's also Vernon Ryder, who's now a junior, who's kind of gotten lost in the shuffle, I have to say. But he's a very good slot receiver, so he will take the field. He actually had 551 yards last year, which is one of the highest on the team. Never found the end zone, though, but I see Vernon Ryder being more of a slot guy. So you can see as much as 5 receivers getting into the mix this season. A tight end, Jason Beckett, after 4 seasons, has graduated to the number 1 guy. Will be Otis McNitt, who is a senior from Bowling Springs. I like McNitt's game. I think it shouldn't be that big of a loss that we lost Beckett. Maybe we'll see it in the running game, but I think in the passing, McNitt is the better catcher anyway. He only has 23 career receptions, but watch that number explode this season as he gets tight end 1 snaps all day. There's also Brian Kennedy behind him from North Charleston, who's also a senior, so we will be losing these 2 guys in the offseason. Those are the top 2 tight ends. At the offensive line, we're going to be replacing 4 out of our 5 starters, starting off at left tackle, where Ari Big Hill will have to take the place. But I do like Big Hill's game a lot. I think he's a good tackle. We saw him struggle, though, in the bowl game against Purdue, where he had like 4 holding calls. He's now a junior, though. He's a 92 overall. He's one of our impact players. I expect Ari Big Hill to be a lot better this year and hold down that blind spot. I think we've done a good job at recruiting offensive line, if I had to say so myself. At left guard, we've moved Davion Merriman over here, who started at right guard for half the season last year. But now that Roundtree is gone, I want to move Merriman to left. I think his game more suits the left side. I think he's more of a pass blocker than a run blocker. But Merriman was a good transfer that we got a couple of off seasons ago as well, where he came over from Tulane. And I thought he played pretty good, in my opinion, last year. It took a little bit of time for him to get used to SEC competition, but I think Merriman should be a lot better this year also as a senior. At center, we have Stephen Colombo, who will be taking over for Jason Zamidella, who got drafted. Colombo played last year at left tackle for a good bit of the season, but this year will move back over to center. He is a very good guy to be anchoring at the middle of your line, although we only have him for 1 year because he is a senior. At right guard, Kevin Fine will take over. He will get his first chance to start. And also, just a side note, look at all the freshmen that we recruited at guard this offseason. My goodness, that's a lot of them. But Kevin Fine will take over. Tamar Smith graduated and Merriman moved over to left, so that did leave a hole at right guard. So it will be Kevin Fine who will get the option. The Charlotte native, former 4-star recruit, 6'5", 337, a big, powerful boy who I'm hoping just can move blockers and move linemen out of those run lanes and let Wade Man get free. At right tackle, we will have to replace Josiah Thompson, who was one of our better linemen last year, but Jamie Johns has been getting ready for this moment. He is a senior from Abbeville High School, who I liked a lot coming out of high school. Now, he does have big shoes to fill. I think he might be, quote-unquote, the weakest of the 5 bunch, but I think Jamie Johns can handle it. You know, he's a former 3-star recruit. He's sat behind Thompson for all this time. He finally gets his chance as a senior. So I think he is up to the challenge. That's the offense. On defense, starting off at left end, we will have Greg Bodden getting the start here. We are familiar with Bodden. He came over from LSU. And now that he's a junior, he's a 90 overall. He's a very good player. So I think he will anchor that defensive line. We saw him get involved in the run game last year. 16 tackles for loss, 9 sacks. He will be probably one of the premier guys on this defensive line. And I have good faith that Bodden will deliver. On the right end spot, this one's going to be a little tougher to sort of replace because we had Mbena Onwuka at right end for the past couple of seasons, and he was an absolute animal. Broke the record for career sacks at South Carolina, which is not easy to do when you think of some of the pass rushers that we've had at this school. I know half of those came at West Virginia, but you know it still stands in the record. But he is going to be sorely missed. He is off and graduated. And the top guy that will get a chance will be redshirt sophomore Enrique Leal, who we saw play a little bit more in the middle of the line last year. But he is 6'2", 252. I think he's built more for the outside. Last year he had 8 tackles for a loss, so he's a good run stopper. I don't know if he'll be able to replace that same pass rushing ability that Onwuka has, which concerns me a little bit, but we'll have to wait and see. If he does struggle, we also have Caleb Cottrell, who I think will be the pass rusher of the bunch. I think him and Leo will kind of rotate at this spot. Leo playing the early downs. I think Caleb Cottrell does have maybe what it takes to represent that passing sort of prowess at 6'2", 242, more of a speed rusher. I don't think he is good in the running game at all, which makes me think he would just be a third down kind of guy. He only had 1 tackle last year, but I expect him to get more involved this season. There's also sophomore Angel Casey as well. So 3 different types of players at right end. We'll have to see who stands out of the bunch. The middle of the line, defensive tackle, we're going to be replacing Derek Vincent Douglas, who ate up a lot of blocks. I'm a little concerned here as well. James Funk will lead the bunch, the redshirt sophomore from Dothan, Alabama, who was a 4-star recruit, saw some playing time last year, but he's got to step up this year. 6'4", 299, he's got some decent size. I just hope that he can stop the run effectively, because that's been one of our strengths the past couple of seasons, and I like to keep it that way. Behind him, there's a little bit of a competition. You got Sean Hager, the senior from Little River, South Carolina, who is also a run stopper. Then you also have Isaac Judge, who's a senior as well. But I'm a little concerned about the middle of the defensive line. Hopefully one of these guys can step up. And going to the linebacker, or left side linebacker, we will have Colby Boyette, who is an interesting story because he was really good as a sophomore and then kind of disappeared last year. He got overtaken. He's a former 5-star. But he's back on the field, and honestly, I think we missed him last year. He had 96 tackles 2 years ago, 2 interceptions. This last year only had 17, so hopefully Boyette can get back to that 2027 form, because we need him in the linebacker. We're missing Bryson Reeves. We're missing Nate Lamb. A couple of good coverage linebackers, and I think that was one of our weaknesses last year, was our passing game. And I think Boyette could do a better job and help with that middle of the field prowess with that 90 speed. So Boyette will be a 3-down linebacker. His buddy will be his other former 4-5-star recruit, Torrey Perkins, who's now a junior from Buffer, Georgia. He got the chance last year to be the captain of the defense. I thought he played well. He racked up 117 tackles, 15 TFLs, 3.5 sacks, but did not pull down an interception, especially in the pass defense. I would have liked to see him at least get 1. So I'd like to see him do a little bit better in the passing game. We know he's a good run-stopping linebacker, but I need to see him more in the passing game this season. And I think Boyette and Perkins could be the duo for the middle of the field. We just have to hope and see. At right outside linebacker, we have Troy Haslam, who didn't get a lot of playing time last year. He's now a sophomore. He is definitely the 3rd linebacker, and I know we do play 3-3-5, but he'll probably be the linebacker that has his hands, on the line, maybe, on the edge, maybe playing that Obinna Onwuka role a little bit. But if we do go to nickel coverage, Haslam will step off the field. But I do like Haslam's game. He's got a good burst of speed. He's got good acceleration. He can get off the line fast. But I don't know if I trust him as much in the pass defense game. Speaking of pass defense, it takes us to the position on the team that concerns me the most, and that is cornerback, because last year we were not very good in the passing game. We got beat deep a lot last year, and we're replacing 4 out of the 5 corners that we had on roster last year. Yes, 4 out of the 5 corners, which is scary, because if we weren't good in pass game at all, how are we going to replace that? So one of the ways we did that is our top corner now listed on the roster is James Eskridge, and well, you're probably wondering where he came from, because he's a junior. We didn't get any transfers, and he's not one of the guys that was on the team last year at corner. That's because last year James Eskridge was a safety. Yes, he was a safety, and we're so thin at corner, we had to move him to cornerback. I thought he had the best coverage traits of the safeties, and I moved him to corner, and James Eskridge will be asked to be the number 1 corner on the team, which is a little scary that our number 1 corner used to play safety, but hopefully he's up for it. He had the best traits. He has good zone. Man's a little low, but we do play a lot of zone anyway, so I'm hoping that Eskridge could step into cornerback well, and his flaws, we can kind of hide it, so we'll have to see how that goes. His buddy will be the only guy that does return from last year, Malik Asante, who's a senior. He didn't play a lot, but he does have a pick 6 to his name from a couple of seasons ago. So he has that one moment when he was a sophomore. Well, now he's a senior. He's going to be a full-time starter. So we'll have to see how the Eskridge-Asante combo goes. I'm a little worried, but we'll have to wait and see. Behind them, we have a couple of 5-star freshmen we got this year, though. Miles Filipovic will probably play as a freshman, as well as Jaleel Griggs. And they were good 5-star recruits, so they will be leaned on early as we try to figure out this cornerback room. At free safety, Danny Kaufman will return for his senior season. I like Kaufman a lot, but I don't think he's played to his potential. He's got elite development, but he gets beat deep pretty often, man. He's not the best center field safety. He did have 3 interceptions last year. It was better last season, but he needs to stop giving up the deep ball because that was our Achilles heel last year. It's something that shouldn't happen consistently, and it did for this team. So if we can eliminate that, if he can be better in deep zone coverage, then we should be better in Golden. Behind him is Nick Spitzer. He's played strong safety the past couple of seasons. I did move him over to free safety. Speaking of strong safety, number one strong safety on the roster now is Chauncey Parker, who got a big jump in the offseason. Honestly, I'm okay with that because, like I just talked about, our safeties gave up a lot of deep balls last year, and maybe mixing it up is not a bad thing. He's a junior 5'11" who has star development from Vero Beach, Florida. Hasn't played a snap for us on the field on defense, but I'm hoping that changes, and I'm hoping he actually can be what we need in that middle of the field or that deep third of the field when we play some cover 6 or something. There is also Sonny Gallen on the roster, who's been the starter for the past couple of seasons. He will play when we play 3 safety sets, but his role will be reduced a little bit because of his ability to give up the deep ball. So hopefully, this change kind of lights a fire. I thought about moving even him to corner, but he might play some nickel, honestly, as well. We might move him close to line if we struggle in the passing game and see how that works. There's a lot of flexibility in the secondary. We're still working through some of that stuff, so it'll be interesting to at least watch early in the season. At kicker, Marquise Otogwe returns. He was actually the only guy who was named to a preseason SEC team. I know Wade Mann did not, but he's preseason second team. Marquise Otogwe was actually good for us last year. Yes, he struggled in the bowl game, but I think overall he was really good, and he's going to be the kicker for the next couple of seasons. And then at punter, we have a new punter, Andres B., who is not a good punter at all, but we had to replace Taylor Montez, and, Andres B. is going to be the punter probably for the next 4 seasons, so it's going to be some growing pains. But that's it for this team. That's what the Gamecocks look like going into the season. Now we'll take a look at the other teams around the country, take a look at our conference, as well as some of the other contenders you should expect this season. We got to start off in the SEC with the defending national champions, the team that went 15-1 last year, a team that has all the tools to repeat this year, and that is the Georgia Bulldogs, who won their first national championship in 6 years, and they look like another talented team, the team to beat in the SEC. They're led at the halfback position by Niall Otis now, who had 12 touchdowns last season. Ryan Puglisi, the Heisman, did transfer, so it'll be interesting to see who plays quarterback, but he does have some help at halfback. And then on defense, they're led by Kevin Bale. Now, the team they beat in the national championship was Auburn, who, ironically enough, is the number 1 seed going into this year. They did beat Georgia last year, even though they lost in the Natty to them and got shut out. They do own a win over the Dogs, the only team to beat Georgia from a season ago. And I do think this is a talented Auburn team, led at wide receiver Malachi Whitted, who had 8 touchdowns last year for the Tigers. And on defense, Marquise Beard, who had 15.5 sacks, a school record, breaking the 2010 record set by Nick Fairley. Then you got the next crop of teams, starting off with number 9 Arkansas, who went 10-3 last year and actually made the playoff, where they lost in the first round to Auburn. They're spearheaded by a great 2-headed halfback tandem. Javier Huber up there, who had 11 touchdowns, then Brian Power, the junior, who will see a lot more playing time this season. They will head an Arkansas ground attack. Texas is the 10 going into this season. They went 9-4 and 4-4 last year in SEC, and they have a talented offense, and some people even think they might be more talented than the Georgia Bulldogs, and they actually are my pick to win the national championship this year. They have a great offensive line led by former 5-star Red Oak, Texas native in Shaq Sly, and Ben Choice will have the gaping holes because of that offensive line. The Red River rival, Oklahoma, is pretty good this year as well. The Sooners last year went 7-6, but are looking to bounce back as they have arguably the best halfback in the SEC, not named Wade Mann, and the best corner in the SEC. Kentrell Duck last year, 962 yards, 9 touchdowns. He'll be a senior this year, and they're led by Shaquem Hayes, who tied a school record in 9 interceptions last year. The record set in 1987 by Ricky Dixon. Ole Miss, the Rebels, the non-ranked teams of the SEC, as we reach the next crop of teams. They went 7-6 last year, and shockingly for them, Kevin Iwosika went pro, so they lost their star quarterback, and now they're led at wide receiver by Anthony Chisena, who is a good wide receiver who caught 7 touchdowns last year. But we got to figure out who's throwing the football to him. Vanderbilt's built a nice program for themselves. They went 7-6 last year, 4-4 in the SEC, and this isn't the pushover Vanderbilt squads that we've seen in the past. Now, they don't have any top-end talent. This is a very deep team. Kentucky also went 7-6 and 4-4 last year. The Wildcats, who beat us in that Hail Mary to end the season. They're a talented squad. We'll see them again this year. They're led at corner Leati Liu, the senior, had 2 interceptions and a forced fumble last year. He spearheads that defense in Kentucky. LSU went 7-6 last year. They're trying to get back to form after a down 2027, as they are led by a pair of good pass rushers who we saw last year and we'll see again this year. Raekwon Livings, who had 4 sacks and 13 tackles for a loss on one side, and then you got Angel Graham, who had 7 sacks and 9 TFLs on the other side. The Missouri Tigers also went 7-6. It's just a big hodgepodge in the middle here in the SEC. They only went 3-5 in conference, however, and they're led by halfback Silas Boutte, who didn't play that well last year, but I expect big things now that he is a redshirt junior, and he'll be asked to take on a big part of the offense. A team that floundered last year was Tennessee. They were the national champions 3 years ago, runners-up 2 years ago, and they only went 6-6 last year and 3-5 in the SEC. They did lose a lot of top-end talent, so it's kind of a transition period here for the Vols, but they are still led by the absolute lightning-quick Javonte Way, who should see his role increase on the team. And then on the offensive line, Gerald Amen is a great center to have, one of the best in the SEC. Alabama, speaking of down teams, only went 4-8 last year, and Alabama seems to be in a new phase of their tenure. They're no longer the Alabama that is going to dominate college football. We don't know who is going to be playing quarterback for them, but they do have a good pair of receivers, whoever that is. London Hendricks, who had 4 touchdowns last year, and Brian Ridley, who had 6, are good 2 targets for whoever starts at the quarterback position in Tuscaloosa. Texas A&M, the Aggies, also had a down season, going 4-8, and kind of like Alabama, they're in a little bit of a transition phase, trying to figure out who's going to be their quarterback. But like in Alabama, there's help. Whoever takes over under center in Texas A&M will have the best halfback in the country by a lot of people's standards, in DeMar Jerry. Florida went 2-10 last year. It was an embarrassment season for the Gators. They've started fresh for themselves. No DJ Lagway, he's long gone. And they just got to find the pieces in place down there in Gainesville. They do have a good anchor on that offensive line, and Jay Worthy, who's a senior, has never allowed a sack in his career. And the final team in the SEC is Mississippi State. The Bulldogs have kind of become the doormat of the conference. They only went 4-8 last year. Lorenzo Clement, the wide receiver, is the guy who leads the way out there in Starkville. 699 yards last year and 5 touchdowns. So that'll do it for the SEC. Now we'll take a look at the other Power 4 conferences. Starting off with the ACC, which is super deep. At the top of the helm will be the Miami Hurricanes, 13-2 last year. The ACC champs lost in the semifinals to Auburn. Almost went back-to-back. They were the national champions from 2 years ago. They got to replace a lot of talent. No Jose Jasmine at quarterback anymore, so they got to solve that issue. They do have a nice halfback in Harvey Salam, who had over 1,000 yards last year on the ground. Juan Buffelli is a good tight end as well. Then on defense, you have Diego Mons. This is still a very talented Miami team that has recruited very, very well. Right behind them is the team that took them to the limit in the ACC Championship game. That's NC State, who comes in preseason ranked number 7. They actually made the playoff last year. They won 12 games. They actually lost in the second round to Miami, so they're trying to get past that Miami hurdle. They're led by defensive corner Iosifa Samu, who had 2 interceptions last year, and a very talented Wolfpack squad. Up next, Stanford comes in ranked 16. They went 9-4 last year, and Stanford has started to come around in the ACC. It's taken some time, but they have some good momentum now. They're led by wide receiver Quentin McSwain, who had over 1,000 yards last year and 8 touchdowns for the Cardinal. And speaking of Stanford, the other Pac-12 former member is Cal, who had a good season. They went 8-5 last year, and they've kind of acquitted nicely to the ACC. They went to the playoff a few years ago, won 8 games last year. They built quite a little team over there in Cal. Shakir Keys leads the way, speedster with 941 yards and 11 touchdowns last year for the Golden Bears. Virginia up next, the number 22 ranked Cavaliers squad, who won 7 games last year. Overall, they have a solid team, good offensive line, and a good defensive standout in Sosa, who's a senior, and he will definitely disrupt a lot of backfields in the ACC. Right behind them in the rankings is number 24, Pittsburgh, who also won 7 games last year. Pitt, in my opinion, came in a little overrated. They were preseason ranked like top 10 last year. Didn't quite play that to that level, but they actually got good down the stretch, and Pittsburgh is never a team that you can sleep on. You got the number 25 team, of course, the Clemson Tigers. We got to talk about our in-state rivals who went 8-5 last year, who've beaten us 4 out of our 5 seasons as the head coach. They're led on defense by a guy I was very high on coming out of high school, the Columbia native, and Jason Gradkowski, who unfortunately went to Clemson. We'll have to see him again this season. And then Lamar Rasmussen, who's been a great left tackle, probably will be a first-round pick once he goes pro after this season. Non-ranked team, we got to talk about the North Carolina Tar Heels because they beat us last year to begin the season. They went 9-4, and we're going to see them this season as well. So we got to get a little bit of revenge on the Tar Heels. Robinson played very well against us last year. They're anchored at right guard by Conrad Little, but I think we can get some revenge against UNC. Moving over to the Big 12, the top team over there is the Utah Utes, who made it to the playoff last year. They went 11-3, lost in the first round to NC State. But the Utes are a talented football program. They have a great offensive line. 3 out of their 5 starting linemen are 90 overall or higher. Deshaun Burt is the highest of that bunch, the former 5-star from Lehigh, Utah. And then also at center, you got Larry Lacoste. The team that won the Big 12 last year is one spot behind him. That's the Kansas Jayhawks, who actually went to the playoff last season, 11-3. Lost in the second round to Wisconsin, but the Jayhawks have some momentum. They built a good program out there in Kansas, led by guard Richard York, and that's kind of the philosophy of the Big 12. You got to have a good offensive line, and Kansas has that, and Richard York heads that bunch. Next group of teams in the Big 12, you got the TCU Horned Frogs, preseason ranked number 17. They won 8 games last year. They're anchored more on the defensive side of the football with a couple of good skill positions. Highest ranked guy on this team is linebacker Levi Carmona. The senior will be the captain of the defense and look to improve upon his 24 career tackles. Colorado and Dion, he's done a great job out there. Ever since even Shador and Travis Hunter left, he's rebuilt nicely. They won 8 games last year. They have a good pair of edge rushers, just like LSU. Colorado has built that identity. You got Nick Mercado on one side, the former 2-star recruit who has 12 career sacks. And then you also have a right end, Brian Armano, another senior who had 7 sacks last year on that offensive line. The number 21 ranked team, UCF Knights, are up next. They always do good early in the season, struggle down the stretch. They're looking to shake that sort of notion this season, headed by halfback Emmett Bragg, the senior, at 563 yards and 7 touchdowns last year, looking to build upon that now that he is a junior. We'll move over to the last Power 4 conference. That's the Big 10, arguably the best conference of football. They've taken a little bit of a hit. They're led by the number 14 Penn State Nittany Lions, who were the Big 10 champs last season, made it to the second round where they got bounced by Auburn. Penn State always has a very deep team, not a lot of top-end talent, but that is changing. They have a good pair of outside linebackers. You got Curtis Bolin on one side, who had 80 tackles last year and 105 back in 2027. And then you got Tanner Rudder on the other side, a good complementary linebacker. Number 6 is the Washington Huskies, who actually made the playoff last year for the first time since going to the Natty back in 2023. The Huskies seem to be back. They won 10 games last year, lost in the second round to the eventual national champions in Georgia. And they got a good offense. Levi Wooten leads the way, 7 touchdowns last year, 17 in 2027. And then Marquise Kennedy is one of the best quarterbacks in the country, leading the way to try to get them back to the playoff. Wisconsin was an interesting story last year. They're the 8th ranked this year, 9-6 last year. A lot of people didn't think they deserved to make the playoff, but they made it all the way to the semis where they lost to Georgia. So the Badgers will be looking to build upon that. Number 11, the Indiana Hoosiers, who made it to the Big Ten Championship last year, did not win it and did not make the playoff. A lot of people thought they got snubbed last year. They're trying to not get snubbed this year. Number 15 is the Purdue Boilermakers, who won at 9 games last year. We saw them in the Citrus Bowl where they did beat us. So a little bit of bitter taste in our mouth to end the season because of the Boilermakers. Now they're trying to push for the playoff. They are led by their offensive line, Stephen Kopp, who is the center, will lead the way. Up next, you got the number 23 ranked Ohio State Buckeyes. You can never sleep on the Buckeyes, even though they only went 6-7 last year and lost in their bowl game. They are probably the most talented team in the Big Ten. They got talent on all facets of the game, but they're very interesting because on defense they're led by Bruce Krause, who is definitely a star. 8 sacks last year, 9.5 in the year before. And also they got the Syracuse transfer at quarterback, Iosifa Duff, so we'll see what he can do now for the Buckeyes. Non-ranked team I want to talk about, though, is the USC Trojans, who only went 4-8 last year, but they were like preseason ranked number 1. And they didn't do very good, but I expect the Trojans to bounce back. They can definitely contend for the Big Ten Championship if they can put it all together. Robert Woods, the linebacker, 80 sacks last year, 2 interceptions. He'll try to lead that defense. Last thing we got to talk about is the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, who are the preseason ranked number 3. They won 11 games last year, but for the second straight season, they should have made a first-round bye because they don't play in a conference. They didn't get it, and they got bounced in the first round by Wisconsin. So maybe Notre Dame eventually joins a conference. They continue to have that kind of luck, but right now they're still independent. Steve Duggar is a good linebacker, and then Gil Condon is the best wide receiver in the country, coming off a 20-touchdown season, a school record. Now we'll talk about the Group of 5 conferences. We'll start off in the American with the representative from the Group of 5 last year in the playoff, the North Texas Mean Green, who come in preseason number 14. They won the AAC. They went 11-3, but they lost in the first round to Washington. They have a very good pass rusher, probably the best pass rusher in the Group of 5 schools, in Marvin Freeman, who had 7.5 sacks last year and 11 in 2027. In the Conference USA, I predict Liberty to get it done, and this is a pretty deep conference because 3 teams finished ranked last year. Liberty was not one of them. They only went 5-7, but I think they've retooled nicely. I think they have the deepest team in the Conference USA, and I do think they could be the team that gets back to that playoff for the first time since 2024. In the MAC, I got to go with Toledo. I didn't go with them last year. They disappointed me in the past, but they did win 9 games. Although they didn't win the MAC, I think the Rockies have the best team. They have a great halfback in Kerry Figures, who's now going to be a junior. And he had 3 touchdowns last year in limited work, but he broke 10 tackles. He had 5'10", 199. He's pretty hard to bring down. I expect him to run rampant in the MAC. The Mountain West in a new look conference, I think UTEP is the team to beat. They went 7-6 last year. I do think the Mountain West is the weakest conference in college football this season, so that's not really saying much, but I think the Miners do win this conference. Pac-12 was always an interesting story because they beefed up this year. Oregon State last year, they got snubbed. They went 13-1, did not make the playoff because they lost in the Pac-12 championship. And because they're not represented as a conference, they didn't get into the playoff. Well, that changes. There's now 9 teams in the Pac-12. Oregon is still a great team. They're led by tight end Scooby Stump. So we'll see if they can repeat last year's success. And I think if they do, they make the playoff this year. But my prediction for the Pac-12 champion is probably the Boise State Broncos. They won it last year. They knocked Oregon State off that pedestal. That's 2 straight Pac-12 championships for the Broncos. And until another team says otherwise, they are the team to beat. Finally, in the Sun Belts, no longer divisions in this conference. Appalachian State is my prediction, who we actually will see this season. They won 8-5 last year, and they could be the Group of 5 representative if they make it out of the Sun Belt. A good team at the top, led by a lot of seniors and upperclassmen. So there's a look at the teams that you'd expect to be at the top of the country this year and compete for the national championship. Last thing we'll do to wrap up is we'll take a look at the preseason top 25, which you saw in the, I guess technically when we were previewing the teams, but here it is. Auburn and Georgia at the top. Surprisingly, Georgia is number 2 and Auburn is number 1, considering Georgia beat Auburn in the national championship. But, oh well, it's the preseason, so who cares? But These are a look at the top 25 rankings. And then finally, we'll take a look not at recruits, we'll take a look at the recruits next episode. But I do want to show you our schedule for this season, as here it is. We will start in week 1 at North Carolina in Chapel Hill. They beat us last year in Columbia. We're going to open the season in revenge game potentially against the Tar Heels. Shaquille Brock's debut at quarterback, and he has to go and face North Carolina, a big Carolina rivalry, so it's not going to be an easy game. Game 2, we will play home against Appalachian State, which is a pretty solid Sun Belt squad that you saw. I expect them to be the best in the Sun Belt, so that might not be the easiest of tasks. Then we do have our FCS opponent this year. I'm going to make it Furman, so we'll play Furman week 3 before we get into SEC play. Home against Vanderbilt, who's done a good job at rebuilding their program. Home against Kentucky, who, if you remember last year, we lost on a Hail Mary to end the game. We have not forgotten about that game. Then we have our bye week, and then we traveled to Death Valley to face the LSU Tigers, who are in a little bit of a rut as a program. Then we head to Missouri in the Battle of Columbia, one of the only teams we were able to beat pretty handily last year. I know the Missouri Tigers have not forgot about that game. Then we head to Kyle Field, one of the loudest stadiums in the country, to face a Aggie squad that's coming off of a down season before playing host to another team off a down season, Alabama, who only won 4 games last year. It's a transition period for the Crimson Tide, but they did beat us last year, so we cannot have that same mistake happen. Home against Oklahoma, who's a pretty good team, and then we go to Ole Miss in Mississippi before ending the year at home against Clemson, who we are 1-4 against in this series. So that is a look at our schedule. I think it's a pretty favorable schedule, I should say, so we should have no problem making a bowl game this year. I don't know if this is the year that we contend for a playoff. I think maybe in a couple of years, maybe a year or two, we can if some of these players develop well. But it's a good team still. I think we have a chance to make some noise. But thank you guys so much for watching. That's going to do it for this one. Next episode, we will go through week 0. I know we're not playing in week 0, but I think that's a good time to introduce you to at least some of the recruits that we will be targeting at this season, trying to have an encore after getting the #1 class in the country. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure you drop a like, you subscribe down below, especially if you want more Dynasty Mode content. This is Mr. Rob, and I'll see you in the next one.